We can,
Very
Banu.
clear.
Okay, thank you. So we'll start by chanting the two shlokas we did last time. We'll chant, look at the translation, and then come to the new shlokas today. Like we do always, I'll chant once and then we'll chant together, keeping our mic on mute. This is shloka number 7. Ajyadharaya srotasa samam Ajyadharaya srotasa samam Saralachintanam Viralatah param Saralachintanam Viralatah param. So the translation of this is: continuous meditation, like the unbroken flow of ghee or a stream of water, is better than broken spells of meditation. So we saw last time how we need to get into a relationship with God, choosing any mode of relationship that suits us, like dasyam, shantam, sakhyam, vatsalyam, madhura, bhratritva, etc. So, and then we need to keep on nurturing that relationship till it becomes unbroken flow of love flowing out towards the Lord, the Ishtadevata or the deity or the concept towards which we are adoring. So then we came to shloka number 8. We'll chant it now. Bheda bhavanat sohamityaso Bheda bhavana sohamityaso Bhavana vida pavani matam Bhavana vida pavani matam. So here Ramana Maharshi is telling us, when you worship or when you meditate, if you do it with the feeling, God and I are one. We are one. There is no difference between us. Then it is far more purifying and it takes you very easily to abidance in the self than meditating or worshipping with a feeling of separation between you and God. God is different, I am different. So far more purifying and empowering than that is the feeling, I and God are one. Tattvam asi. So aham asmi. So that is what he told us in this. So we looked at the entire sadhana experience of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, how to him Goddess Kali was everything and she manifested in front of him and she moved around with him as though she is his human companion, like a mother and he is the child. And then after that, Totapuri, Advaita Guru came and he initiated Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa into Advaita Marga. So how Ramakrishna Paramahamsa moved from form to the formless. So this also we saw last time. Now, starting with what we are going to discuss today. You may be wondering what are all these doing on the screen. So next month we have Ganesh Chaturthi. So many people will bring, I don't know what will happen this time, but normally what we do is we bring an idol of Ganesha and people who worship Gauri will bring an clay idol of Gauri. And during Dasara or Durga Ashtami, we find in Bengal and other states that perform Durga Ashtami, they will bring a clay idol of Durga Mata. And then we worship, we provide an asana for the deity. We don't look at that idol as a figure of clay. We think that is Ganesha, that is Gauri, that is Durga. And we worship that idol, the deity. we do Shravanam, we listen to the stories, to the glories of Durga, to the glories of Ganesha, to the glories of Gauri, and then we do Kirtanam, we sing bhajans, we chant their glories, we do Smaranam, we keep thinking of God. Many people keep the deity in the house for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 11 days. So during that period, continuously they're serving the deity. They offer Naivedyam, they offer flowers, they offer fruits. With the bhavana, I'm actually serving the deity. I'm doing the Pada Sevana of Ganesha, of Gauri, of Durga. Then we do Archana. We chant the mantras and we offer worship. We do Vandanam, we do Namaskaram, and we do Dasyam. We think I am the Dasa and the Lord is the master. So some people swing the fan, Chamara Seva. So they fan the deity, then they offer bath for the abhishek of the deity. They do pancha, all milk, curds, ghee, everything together. They do abhishek of the deity. So they think I am the slave or I am the servant. I will serve my master in any way. After that, the deity stays in the house for 2 days, 3 days. Then what happens? Slowly a feeling of friendship will start growing up. The Lord is my friend. So by the time the 7 days or 11 days or 10 days are up, I remember when I was a little girl and they had to immerse the Gauri or Ganesha, I would start crying so loudly. They had to do it when I was sleeping. Otherwise, I would not let anybody immerse the Ganesha or the Gauri. So finally, all that we have done to this deity, we have spent 10 days with it or 11 days with it. We have done so much of seva and we have developed such a big rapport with that, strong rapport with the deity. We feel it is my friend. And then we go and immerse it in water. So why do we do this? Every year we do this. The rishis have given this to us to remind us of these 9 steps of bhakti. You do all this, but when you are doing all this, whom are you adoring actually, is the question. Whom are we adoring? We are adoring the self. The Lord has come to us in the manifest form of the self. The self has manifested as Gauri or as Ganesha or as Durga. And we have adored the self in that form. But it doesn't stop there. To remind us that the self is actually formless. The self is a substratum. The manifest is only an appearance. It comes and it goes. Jagat, Jagat or world means that which comes and goes. So to remind us of that, to bring us back to the truth, to show us that we need to be established in the formless, which is the self, we are asked to immerse this deity in the water. If you, nowadays in Bangalore, you don't get water anywhere. You can't go searching for lakes or wells. Earlier we would do that. So most people will keep a bucket of water and we put the deity inside. By the morning, if you look at it, it's just a pile of mud. So from the form to the formless. From 2 to 1, the devotee was different from the Lord initially. The devotee was different from the deity. And then at the end of the worship, what happened? The deity and the devotee became one. So this cyclic process comes to us every year to remind us. But most of us forget the symbology, the metaphors, and we cling on to the customs. So we have heard of Jalaluddin Rumi. He was a very famous Sufi poet and a saint. So he has written a small poem, very touching poem, It begins with, there came one and knocked at the door. So imagine there is a hut and a traveler has come and he is knocking at the door. So when he knocks, the door is closed, and from inside he hears a voice, and the voice asks, "Who is there?" And then the traveler says, "Beloved, it is I. Beloved, it is I." Then the voice inside answers, "There is no room here for you and me. There is no space here for you and me. Go and come back later." So the traveler goes. He travels all over the world, and then he comes back to the same hut, to the same door. And again he knocks. And the voice says, "Who is there?" Then the traveler says, "It is you, my Lord. It is thee." So then the voice says, "Open the door and come in. There is room for only one." So this is the journey of bhakti. We begin with two. We begin with the devotee and the Lord. And as the relationship progresses and it grows closer and closer and stronger and more intense, the two merge into one. The devotee discovers he never was separate from the Lord. It was just his own imagination. It was a delusion which made him think that he was separate. But to realize that he traveled everywhere. Traveling everywhere means he did so many different kinds of sadhanas. Maybe he went to so many masters. Maybe he practiced so many different systems of yoga. And then he came to the simple realization, there are no two, there is only one. In Vedanta also, there is a parallel to this story. The story of Sage Ribhu and Nigadha. Many of you may know it, but still, because it is very relevant here, we will recall it. Sage Ribhu was a great master. He had a disciple called Nigadha. So to Nigadha, Sage Ribhu, he disclosed the secret of Vedanta. He told Nigadha, there is only the self. Other than the self, there is nothing. The entire world is an appearance of the self. And the self is the substratum. You are the self. You are Brahman. Nigadha listened to him, and then he went back to his village. And in his village, he forgot this teaching of his guru, and he slipped back into an attitude of dualism. Dualism, I'm not talking about philosophy of dualism and non-dualism. He slipped back into the feeling of separateness, that he is separate from God, and he was living his life. Sage Ribhu came to know that this had happened, and he knew the potential of Nigadha. He knew that Nigadha was very ripe, so he went to Nigadha's village. And when he went there, the royal procession was going on the road. The king was seated in a palanquin on top of the elephant, and his soldiers and his ministers and his retinue, they were all going in a very grand procession on the street. And Nigadha was standing there and watching. So Ribhu disguised himself as a villager who knows nothing, and he went and stood next to Nigadha and he said, "What is happening here?" And then Nigadha said, "Hey, that's the king riding on the elephant. Don't you know anything?" Oh, that's the king, is it? Oh, that's the elephant, is it? Okay. But which is the king and which is the elephant? Ribu got quite irritated. He said, the king is on top, he's sitting above, and then elephant is below. Nigadha said, king is sitting on top and elephant is below. So Ribu said, what is above and what is below? Nigadha got really fed up. He said, you bend over, stand on your hands and feet in the crawling position. So says Ribu stood on his hands and feet. The way we stand when we take our grandchild or child for a ride around the room saying, okay, you're on the horse, come on, come on. So says Ribu stood like that. And then Nigadha climbed on the back of Ribu and he said, see, now you are below, you are the elephant, I am above and I am the king. Did you understand? So says Ribu said, okay, I understood king and elephant, I understood above and below, but I didn't understand you and I. What is you and what is I? Immediately, Nigadha's mind came to a standstill. He was confronted by an existential question, all of a sudden coming out of the blue, coming from his own Sadguru with all the force of his jnana. And Nigadha remembered the teaching of Ribu. Immediately, he clambered off the back of Sage Ribu. He fell at his feet and he said, Master, I have seen. I have understood. You and I are one. There is no you and there is no I. So this is the culmination of bhakti. From here, Bhagwan is taking us in the 9th shloka forward. We have 9th and 10th, 2 more shlokas in Bhakti Yoga, which we will complete today. So let us chant the 9th shloka. Bhava shunya sad bhava susthitihi bhava shunya sad bhava susthitihi bhavana balat bhaktiruttama bhavana balat bhaktiruttama. So bhavana balat, by the power of meditation. Here bhavana means meditation, or by the power of the feeling or the direct experience of oneness, by the power of meditation. Bhava shunya, devoid of thoughts. Here bhava means thoughts, shunya, it is a void. So bhava shunya, the mind devoid of thoughts. Sadbhava, sadbhava means in the best supreme kind of devotion. Sadbhava, very, very good feeling. Sadbhava susthitihi, to be established in true being, in my own true nature. Susthiti, sthiti means being or nature. Susthiti, true being. So by the power of meditation, devoid of thoughts, one is established in true being, Bhaktiruttama, and this is the best form of devotion or the supreme form of devotion. So here, Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi is once again telling us what happens when you surrender completely. That means we give up the individuality of I am the body, mind, and intellect. Then what is left is only the self. So when you are in this state, there are no thoughts. We may ask how? How are there no thoughts? So it is simple. Till now, through parables, through stories, through religious customs, we have seen that finally, there is only one. But as long as we believe there are two, talk goes on in the mind. I keep on changing my personalities. Inside, there are so many self-images that I have made. Like we make Ganesha out of clay, we make Gauri out of clay, or we make Durga out of clay. Like that, images of thoughts. I have made so many images of myself. Every role is an image. I am a father. And then in a father, when I do something right and the relationship with my child is going well, I am a good father. So there is a good father image. Then there is one more bad father image. I lost my temper. I yelled at my child. So one bad father image. One good husband image, bad husband image. So like that, or neutral also. So we have so many images, thousands of images, like we have thousands of idols, Gauri, Ganesha. Ganesha itself, if you go to the market to buy a deity, how many images do you see? So many of them you see. So like that, within us, even when we are alone, all these self-images are there inside us. Not just the present images, past images, the image of the hurt child, the image of the praised child, the image of the child who bossed other people, the image of the child who was helpless when other people called the shots. So many images, all these images, we have not thrown away any of them. They're all there. None of them are dissolved. So even when we are alone, what happens? All these different images will begin dialogues inside us. It's as though some kind of drama, mono acting is going on. So one image will say, no, see, this is what you should do. You should behave like this. You should think like this. You should feel like this. Then another image within us will say, no, 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 no. Who said you should be like that? I have a right to do this. So this kind of dialogue, debate, it goes on and on in the mind. That's because there are so many there. Outwardly, just I alone am there. Vani or Shamla or Sajni or Jankiram, just one person is there for somebody looking from outside. But in my mind, there are so many roles, so many images. And each one will say something different, pulling me in different directions, adding more and more voices. I have images of other people also, my mother, my father. I am different. Other people are different from me. World is different from me. God is different from me. Even with God, we have dialogues. Why have you given this kind of a situation? You should not have done this to me. Or we may say, thank you so much. You have been so kind to me. But still, dialogue. So if this compulsive thinking has to go, this non-stop dialogue has to stop, then there should be only one. So when there is Atma Nivedana, in this case, Atma, we should not think of it as the supreme. Atma Nivedana means ego, the idea of who I am, the idea that I am the body, mind, and intellect. The 9th step in Bhakti Yoga, according to Bhagavatam, the final step. So I give up this idea that I am separate, I am a separate entity, I am an individual. The minute I give up that idea, all these images are gone. No images are left in my mind. No dialogues can go on. If I need to think for any task, I can think. But if I don't want to think, there is no need to think. There is no compulsive thinking going on. Because of what? by the power of meditation, where Soham Ityasau, I think that God and I are one. We are not different. We are not separate. So through the power of that meditation, one is established in true being. And there are no thoughts, because there is only one. When there is only one, there is no need for thoughts. And this is supreme devotion. So Bhagavan is saying, don't think chanting Sahasranama is supreme devotion. Yes, it is very good devotion. It is wonderful. Don't think doing japa alone is devotion. It is wonderful to do japa. Don't think sitting and worshipping an image alone is devotion. It is a wonderful practice, no doubt. But beyond all this, go beyond. This is supposed to take you on your journey. Don't get stuck to the vehicle. Move on. So when you move on, you will find that there is only one, and you will get established in that true state of your being. And this is supreme devotion. So just to take a few examples so that we understand better what Bhagavan is talking about. I think many of you may have read the book called Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton. He has also written Search in Secret Egypt. He has written many other books also. Actually, his name is Raphael Hurst, and Paul Brunton is a pen name. So in the Search in Secret India, Paul Brunton has described how he came to India. He was a journalist and a bookseller in England, and he was very well read in the philosophies of different religions, also in Hinduism. And he came to India searching for a master. He said, so many people talk about, so many books talk about wonderful gurus in India, but are they still there? Can somebody guide me? So he came to India, and in the book, we read his account of how he traveled to so many places, how he met many, many masters of wisdom. And in Chennai, one man called Subramanya, he was a devotee of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi since a few months. He came and met Paul Brunton, and he said, my guru lives further to the south. He's a wonderful Maharishi. Will you come with me? I will take you and introduce you to my guru. So Paul Brunton is not convinced. He says, I've already packed all my luggage and I'm going to the north of India. I'm returning to the north of India. So can everybody mute, please? Can everyone mute? Ravi, can you mute everyone?
Yeah. ಅಮ್ಮ ಹುಷಾರ ಮಾಡು ಕಸ
ಮಣ್ಣಾಗ ಹಾಕ್ಬೇಕಿತ್ತು ಪಾಪ ಹಾಕೊಂಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟೆ ನಾನು
ಏ ಹಾಕ ಒಂಚೂರು ಕಸ ಮಾಡ್ಕ
Hello.
ಫೋನ್ ಹುಷಾರು
Can we mute, please? I think it's Ravi's laptop.
ಆ ಫೋನ್ ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡ ಹುಚ್ಚಂತರ ಅಯ್ಯ ಅದೇ ನಾವು
B19, you have not muted.
I think that is Ravi's laptop or Ram's laptop.
B19 is mute. You're the only one who is.
Okay. So Paul Brunton was not convinced by what Subramanya was saying. He said, I've already packed my luggage and I would like to return to the north of India. I have some other things scheduled. So Subramanya is not convinced. He said, I will return this evening. Maybe you will have changed your mind. So Paul Brunton goes back. Subramanya goes away and Paul Brunton Suddenly he is taken to meet the Kanchi Mat Sadguru. So he goes and meets this Sadguru, Kamakoti Pita, and the Jagat Guru talks to him. At the end of a very fruitful conversation, the Jagat Guru says, there is a wonderful Maharishi called Ramana Maharshi further south. I have only one request from you. Before you go away to the north of India, please make sure that you meet him. Please promise me that. So Paul Brunton promises. And then he comes back to his room and he finds that Subramanya is waiting for him. And Subramanya is overjoyed. He says, we will go tomorrow morning. Let us set out for Tiruvannamalai. And they travel by train and bullock cart, and they arrive at Tiruvannamalai. And when Paul Brunton walks into the hall where Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi is sitting, Paul Brunton finds that Bhagwan is just sitting in a sort of trance state. He's in a kind of trance state. So in that state, he has brought some fruits. So Paul Brunton goes and keeps the fruits in front of Sri Ramana Maharshi. And he goes and sits down on the floor where everybody is sitting. And he sits there. While some time passes, while coming in the train, Paul Brunton has made a very big list. A list of questions. Can you guess how long that list is? It is 32 pages long. So many questions, literally like a book of questions. He wants to ask Ramana Maharshi all those questions and clarify his doubts. So he has that thick booklet of questions with him and he is sitting there. So as he sits there waiting, 1 hour passes, nobody moves. Bhagwan is not moving, he's sitting very, very still. He seems to be looking out of the window, but he is not moving a muscle. Initially, Paul Brunton is feeling irritated. How long should I sit here? Is it a waste of time coming here? What if that master doesn't talk to me at all? Nobody is moving, nobody is doing anything. So he's restless. I have so many questions to ask. He's sitting there. Time passes. Time passes. Then slowly, Paul Brunton says, I don't know what happened. There seemed to be an ocean of peace there surrounding me. And that peace was slowly percolating into me. He says, the thought-tortured brain, compulsive thinking brain of mine suddenly found rest. There were no thoughts. Nothing bothered me anymore. All the questions that I had written down, they dropped away one by one. They didn't seem important. They seemed so trivial. This wonderful sea of silence, of peace, of love, of being, nothing seemed to matter. And so, after maybe 2 hours or more, suddenly Bhagwan moved and he looked into the eyes of Paul Brunton. And Paul Brunton says, I can't describe it. It was amazing, but I can't say a word about it. Something happened. So after that, Paul Brunton had lunch and he came back. And he asked Bhagwan, what path do you advise? What path do you advise? He asked many questions. I've taken up only this one question. And then Bhagwan said, be still. Do not think. Know that I am. We have been doing the I am meditation. I know I exist. I exist. Just be there. That is all you need to do. So Paul Brunton actually wrote a book. Once he wrote this Search in Secret India, there are 3 chapters on Ramana Maharshi in that. It's a big book. But remember, Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi never moved out of Tiruvannamalai. After he came to Tiruvannamalai, for 50 years or more, he did not move from there. He stayed there. But the world came to him. And Paul Brunton played a very important role in letting everyone in the West know about Bhagwan. When this book, Search in Secret India, it was published, many Westerners read it. And so many people came here to find peace. And many of them stayed in the ashram. They just built a hut in the ashram or just outside the ashram, and they stayed there. Their entire lives, they just stayed there, giving up the luxuries of their life in the West. They adjusted to the primitive conditions and they lived there. So out of that, the photo that I have put at the top most on the left-hand side, that is Paul Brunton. Then we have next to that, we have S.S. Cohen. He read the Search in Secret India, and out of reading the entire book, only 3 chapters attracted him. And those 3 chapters were the chapters on Ramana Maharshi. So he came to Tiruvannamalai. He says, when I came into the ashram, they told me to go to the dining hall. Breakfast was going on. And I walked into the dining hall, and Bhagwan was sitting there, a bronze-skinned man, just wearing a loincloth, sitting and eating on the floor. The minute I entered the dining hall, he said, in a very sweet voice, Cohen says, he said, come and eat breakfast. He said, I sat and ate breakfast as though I was in a daze. And then I went and sat in the meditation hall where Bhagwan also came and sat. And I was looking at Bhagwan, and slowly my mind slipped into a mood of deep contemplation. I didn't see Bhagwan as a form of blood and flesh. I felt he was the very truth. He was a principle. And I could palpably feel the self. Feel in the sense, he says, I understood that I was the self. So that is the experience of Cohen. And then we have Shantammal. We come back to the locale of Tiruvannamalai. Below you see a group photograph. So in the photograph, I have put an orange circle. So that is Shantammal. Shantammal lived in a village near Tiruvannamalai. And those days were days of epidemics. We are also now going through this pandemic, so it is much easier for us to relate to those times. So in some kind of epidemic, she lost many members of her family. Her daughter, she got her married. Then in childbirth, her daughter also died. And she had no family and she was very poor. So in those days, when a relative is very poor and has no form of support, that relative is given shelter in somebody's house. So she moved from relative's house to relative's house, cooking for them, cleaning for them, taking care of the house. One day she is cooking in a relative's house. She says, I was boiling rice. And all of a sudden, I felt For whom am I doing this work? Why am I doing this work? Who am I? And soon after that, she went to a devotee of Ramana. She went to his house and she saw Bhagwan's photo. And she said, this is my guru. I need to go to Tiruvannamalai. So somebody gave her some money. 40 people were going to Tiruvannamalai and she went with them in a group. And she went and sat in front of Bhagwan for 40 days. She says it was so blissful. But at the end of 40 days, I had to leave. And Bhagwan said, Shantammal, wait. Upadesha Saram, what we are studying right now. The book is ready. But it will come tomorrow from the press. So I will give you a copy of that book. You take it with you and you read it every day. So she waits for a day. She takes the Upadesha Saram and then she is weeping, but she has to leave. And after 1 year, Bhagwan sends her. He makes sure that an invitation to Ramana Jayanti goes to her. And she somehow borrows money and she comes back. And when she is in the ashram cook has to go on leave. So she starts cooking in the kitchen and she works with Bhagwan. And one day she is working, Bhagwan is there in the kitchen and Bhagwan is stirring the sambar. As he is stirring the sambar, he turns around and looks at Shantammal. Just gaze. Immediately, Shantammal becomes still physically and still inside. She doesn't know how much time passes. But then suddenly, Bhagwan moves and he says, this has boiled fully and become noiseless. Now you can add the spices. And Shantammal understands her mind also now has become noiseless. So she can add the spice of Jnana. She can start doing Atma Vichara. So this is the story of Shantammal. So everywhere, if we read Chronicles of Devotees, I'm just quoting 1 or 2 or 3, but there are so many accounts. And for each, knowledge is given in a different way. It is said that the workers who helped Bhagwan in the kitchen for so many years, they were really a fortunate lot. They had to do a lot of work. They were busy from morning till night. That part is there. But so often they got Bhagwan in the kitchen and during cooking, things would happen. He would give them wisdom. He would give them insights. He would just gaze at them in such a way that they got established in stillness. So these accounts also, we read many of them. Then we come to Shloka 10. Today at the end of the session, we will be doing I am meditation and also spiritual heart meditation. We'll be combining both of them and doing it together. So the Shloka 10 is talking about I am meditation, or it is talking actually about the spiritual heart. We'll chant the 10th Shloka. Hristale manah swasthata kriya. Hristale manah swasthata kriya. Bhakti yoga bodhascha nishchitam. Bhakti yoga bodhascha nishchitam. So Hrit Sthale. Hrit is heart. Sthale, Hrit Sthale, in the place which is the heart. Here Bhagwan is also talking about awareness. He is also talking about a particular spot on the body. So we'll come back to that. Manaha swasthata kriya. When you take the mind back to its source in the heart, you keep taking the mind back to the source in the heart. then this is the best form not only of Bhakti Yoga, it is the best form of Kriya Yoga. Kriya, Bhakti Yoga, Bodhascha Nishchitam. Bodha, Jnana Yoga. Definitely, Cha means and. So, Kriya, Bhakti and Jnana Yoga. Nishchitam, this is certain. So, Bhagavan is saying, when you keep taking the mind back to the source again and again, if it pops out, you take it back to the source. How to take it back also we will see. So this practice or this sadhana is definitely the best kind of Kriya, Bhakti and Jnana Yoga. There is no doubt about this. We find the same kind of explanation in the Bhagavad Gita also. But before we come to this Bhagavad Gita shloka, I would like to talk about Hrit or the spiritual heart. So whenever we talk about ourselves, we normally point to a place in the chest and we say I. We don't say I. The face is actually how we recognize people. We don't look at the heart and recognize people. We look at their faces and recognize people. So I don't say I unless I'm dancing or something. When I'm just talking to somebody, I'm not going to say I. I'm not going to say, point to my hand or my leg or my stomach or my entire body when I say I. Very intuitively, each one of us, including a small child, will point to a place on the chest and say I. So Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi says, this place to which you point intuitively, that is your spiritual heart, Adhyatma Hridaya. So as long as, though the self is everywhere all the time, the definition of the self itself is that it is infinite. It is there everywhere all the time. So how are we saying that the spiritual heart, how does Bhagavan says that is the abode of the self? Then how can we say that one particular point is the abode of the self? So for this, Ramana says, as long as you think you are this body, you have Deha Bhava, you think I am this body, as long as I think I am this body, then in the body there is a spot which is the abode of the self. But when you realize you are the self, then the self is everywhere all the time for you. Just like we need a deity initially to relate to. If somebody tells me God is everywhere all the time, pray to God, I may find it very difficult. But if they give me a focus and they say, pray to this form or pray to this word or pray to this concept, then I find it much easier. So in the same way, as long as I feel I am the body and I need a focal point for the self, then this spiritual heart is the focal point. Use that as a focal point. So if we just close our eyes, right now we can close our eyes for a minute. Wherever you are sitting, just straighten your back. Very lightly close your eyes. If you want, you can allow your hand to rest on the spot where you say, where you point when you say I. If you don't need to do that, you can just keep your attention very lightly on that spot, on the spiritual heart. Just your attention is on the spiritual heart. Do you find the mind becoming quiet? Open your eyes. Can do it anywhere, for a short time, for a long time. You're just waiting in the queue. Now we have to stand in those circles. So we are standing, waiting for our turn. Even with your eyes open, your mind can focus on the spiritual heart. It's difficult for you to think when you're doing this. Actually, mind becomes quiet. It becomes stilled. So we'll discuss in the end if anybody has any doubts about this. We'll also be doing this again in the end. So Bhagavad Gita, in the 10th chapter, Shloka 20, one day a person who was sitting with Bhagwan, he asked Bhagwan, Bhagwan, Bhagavad Gita has 700 and odd shlokas. How can we remember all those shlokas? Do we need to remember all those shlokas? Can you tell me one shloka, Bhagwan, instead of 700 and odd shloka? Can I just remember one shloka of the Gita? We may also have thought like this, isn't it? So then Bhagwan said, look at the 20th shloka in the substratum. Then creation manifests, self manifests as creation. There is an appearance, and then there is a continuance, and then there is a dissolution. So Krishna is saying, I am the self, and I am seated in the heart. So this is the spiritual heart that Bhagavan is talking about. Now, who else did this sadhana of the spiritual heart? There were many people, but out of that, one of my favorite stories is the story of Meenakshi. When we began this Upadesha Saram, we said there was a famous Tamil poet called Muruganar, and Muruganar was writing a poem, and in that poem he was writing about how Lord Shiva came into Darukavana and gave his message or his Upadesha to a sect of sages who were engaged in ritualistic worship. And when he came to the point where Lord Shiva's part had to be written in the poem, he could not write it. So he came to Bhagwan and he said, Bhagwan, write it. And that is the Upadesha Sara. That is the teaching Shiva gives the all the Bairagis in the forest. So Muruganar, he was a Tamil scholar. We see here, actually, we see Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi in the center. And to his right is Muruganar. And to his left is Muruganar's father-in-law. His name is Dandapani Swami. So Muruganar was a Tamil scholar and he was married to Meenakshi. About 6 months earlier, he was married to Meenakshi. And he was teaching in a school, and Dandapani Swami, who had had a darshan of Bhagwan, Dandapani Swami took up sannyas and he stayed in the ashram itself. So one day he came to visit his daughter Meenakshi and his son-in-law Murugannar, and he gave a book of Bhagavan to Murugannar and he told him, read it. So Murugannar read that book. It was written by Bhagavan, Arunachala Akshara Manamalai. It is a composition, 108 verses by Bhagavan. And Murugannar read that and he was so transformed inside, he was so drawn to Bhagavan. He went to Ramanashram and he didn't come back. So Meenakshi went in search of her husband and she found him there. And then she sat in front of Bhagavan and she started weeping. She said, Bhagavan, look at my fate. My husband has come here. He refused. Murugannar is not talking to Meenakshi. He is living the life of an ascetic, though he has not taken up sannyasa. And Meenakshi is weeping in front of Bhagavan. At that time, very few devotees were in the ashram, maybe about 10 or 15, that's all, including Dandapani Swami. So Meenakshi tells Bhagavan, what is my fate, Bhagavan, what shall I do? So Bhagavan says, it's all right, Meenakshi, don't worry. You also stay in the ashram. Let us see. If Murugannar changes his mind, let us see. Otherwise, you stay in the ashram. So Meenakshi also is staying in the ashram. She helps in the cooking. She says those were really joyful days for me. I used to cook in the kitchen and then Dandapani Swami, my father, and Bhagavan and another 2 or 3 devotees, they would all come and help. And we had such wonderful times working together. Very informal setup. So this is going on. And then Bhagavan is also a time when cooking is not happening. He is telling everybody, sit down, do Atma Vichara, do self-inquiry, meditate. So after the cooking is over, everybody is sitting in the hut in front of Bhagavan and they're all meditating. Meenakshi doesn't know how to meditate. So one day she says, Bhagavan, everybody sits with their eyes closed and they sit for hours together, but I don't know how to meditate. Please teach me how to meditate. I haven't read Vedanta. I don't know much from any scripture. Maybe I don't have enough knowledge to meditate. I don't know what to do. So Bhagavan says, Meenakshi, you don't need knowledge to meditate. Sit down. And she sits down. And he says, see, where you point to your chest when you say I, that is your spiritual heart. Just close your eyes. Keep your attention focused on the spiritual heart effortlessly and be there. That's all you need to do. And immediately Meenakshi understands and she begins to meditate. She says, it was the simplest thing. I thought it is so difficult to meditate. I thought my mind will chatter and chatter and chatter for ages. But using this technique taught to me by Bhagavan, I was also able to sit for hours together in meditation very easily. So this is a wonderful technique. So just one more illustration about this technique and about technique of who am I. Bhagavan had a classmate when he was in Tiruchudi and he was going to school. He had a close friend called Ranga Iyer. So later on, Ranga Iyer came to Bhagavan and he became a devotee of Bhagavan. And one day he is sitting in the darshan hall in front of Bhagavan. And it so happened that a nest of squirrels was just behind Bhagavan. A squirrel had built her nest behind Bhagavan. She also had some baby squirrels, but a cat had eaten the mother squirrel. And now the baby squirrels were in the nest. And you know what baby squirrels will do? They just come out, try to explore. So these baby squirrels would keep coming down onto Bhagavan's couch, and then Bhagavan will take that squirrel and put it back. So Ranga Iyer says, Bhagavan, why are you doing that? Why do you keep taking that baby squirrel and putting it back? So Bhagavan says, you know, the mother got eaten up by the cat. So I'm trying to keep the babies safe. But they don't know that they will be safe if they are in the nest. So they keep coming out. So every time they come out, I take them and I put them back. That's how I keep teaching them. Be there, you will be happy. If you come out, there is danger. So in the same way, every time you get a thought, take the thought back to its source. Remember, Shloka 10, Bhagavan is saying, go back to the source in the heart. So every time when we sit for self-enquiry, what do? We sit, we close our eyes, we are in I am, or we can focus on the spiritual heart. And if a thought comes, if a thought doesn't come, they are just still. If a thought comes, we take that thought back to its source. Just like Bhagavan was taking that baby squirrel and putting it back in the nest. How do we take it back to the source? We say, for whom is this thought? It is for me. Who am I? The mind is silent. That is taking the mind back to its source. Hristhale manaha swasthata kriya. Take the mind back to its source. So focusing on the spiritual heart takes the mind back to its source. Every time a thought comes, only when the thought comes, if we ask, for whom is this thought? It is for me. Who am I? Again, we are taking the mind back to its source. And it is quiet. If it comes out again like a baby squirrel in the form of another thought, we do the same thing and we take it back to its source. So Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi says, this is the best kind of Bhakti Yoga, Kriya Yoga, Jnana Yoga. It is the best kind of yoga because each time you are going back to the source. You are going back to the source and staying there. If a vasana comes up again you are going back to the source, staying there. So this is what Bhagavan is teaching us in the 9th and 10th shlokas. If we have any questions, we can spend 5 minutes in questions. I'll come out of the presentation. You can type your questions on chat. Let me see, already there. Please explain how Meenakshi meditated once more. Are we not supposed to explore the thought itself? Okay, there are 2 questions. So how Meenakshi meditated is what we also did. There is a spot where I intuitively touch and I say, I. When I'm talking to somebody and I say, I came, I did it. I don't hesitate or anything. Immediately I go and intuitively point to some spot in the chest. Bhagavan also gave directions. If you draw a center line on the chest, 2 fingers to the right of the center of the chest is the Adhyatma Hridaya. So you can use either you can just say I and see where it goes, or you can draw a center line and you can measure 2 fingers to the right and you can say it is there. So all Meenakshi did was closed her eyes, and you don't do anything with your eyes. Don't, in the closed position, don't think eyes have to focus there or anything like that. Just with eyes closed, keep the attention focused on that spot. That is all. So that is how Meenakshi meditated. So keeping your eyes focused, usually when we do that, thoughts subside on their own. But in spite of that, if there are thoughts, then we do, who am I? That's what we just went into that also. We say, for whom is the thought? It is for me. Then who am I? So I think that, is that clear? Then other question, are we not supposed to explore the thought itself? No. You do not get into a dialogue with the thought. You do not try to analyze the thought, because that becomes endless. All we do is, we say, for whom is the thought? And then we say, who am I? So we do not go into the content of the thought or the analysis of the thought. We use the thought as a vehicle. We use the thought as a vehicle to go back to the source. By asking, who am I? Mind becomes silent. That is all. That's all we do. We don't explore the thought. Is it important to do kriyas before meditation, like the one taught by the Art of Living and Sadhguru? I have not done Art of Living or Sadhguru's courses. You can do pranayama, because it helps the mind to focus. In fact, the next 4 shlokas, we will be doing Raja Yoga. So in Raja Yoga, Bhagavan is talking about using breath to control the mind. So it is good if you can do, if your mind is not already focused, you can do Omkar chanting, or you can do any kind of pranayama that helps you to focus. So you can prepare the mind with kriyas or using the breath or by chanting. But while doing who am I sadhana, none of that is required. You can begin by observing the breath or doing anything. Once the mind gets focused, you let that technique go, and you're still. If thought comes, you say, who am I? Should we combine both bhakti, jnana yoga? Samanvaya bhava. That is what we have been talking about now. That there is only the self. God and devotee are not different. So that is in a way combination of bhakti and jnana. For how long should we sit silent? As long as you like. It depends on how much time you have. There is no time limit to the sadhana. At least 15 to 20 minutes would be required to be able to find it effective. But even once you start getting a taste of it, you can even start doing short bits, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or maybe I normally would like to have a longer span for the meditation than is required. If I want to meditate for half an hour, or then I would like 1 hour to be free. If I want to extend, if it is going very well, it's nice to be able to extend without feeling any pressure. So you could keep a 1 hour or slot or something, sit down, see how it goes. But it is good to stay with it, even if it is difficult initially. You feel more thoughts are coming. Some days more thoughts may come. Some days it may be more silent. It doesn't matter. To stick to the practice is important. So maybe 20 minutes, half an hour as a minimum. And then you can extend as much as you want. But during the day, between tasks, you can even do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes through the day to keep you in the same kind of frequency of awareness, frequency of witnessing.